Welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan. I'm the host of the show, where I feature inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their expertise and their insights. Today's podcast is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a leading digital advertising agency with over 160 team members who help their clients attract new customers, grow existing, and also become more successful. Spinutech, thank you for your sponsorship today. And our guest today is June Archer. June's hallmark is ability to solve complex market and enterprise jigsaw puzzles, piecing together the way towards peak performance and valuation. From her early career at Bloomingdale's through world-class organizations such as Disney, Sesame Workshop, and Godiva Chocolatier, she has navigated complexities of just about everything consumer products and retail industry can throw at you. This includes turning around iconic yet sleepy brands, grappling with boat-rocking distribution and traditional retail models, and unlocking the gateway to new channels of distribution and geographies. June's been educated at Princeton. She's a frequent alumni at her stomping grounds as a student member of multiple committees, and is a chair of the Board of Trustees for Princeton University Store. Continued education and certifications from Northwestern University and Wharton Business School. June, welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast.
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. June, I'm super excited to have our audience get to know you a little bit better. To get started, could you talk a little bit about maybe where you grew up, maybe when you're a little girl, what you thought when I grow up one day, this is what I'd like to aspire to be from a career-wise, and a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. This is the question that everybody hates. So tell me about yourself. So
I'm curious.
So for you, no problem. I was born in Navrongo, Ghana, on the west coast of Africa. And when it was time for school, my parents decided to come back to the United States. So my mom had homeschooled my eldest sister, and she was like, enough of that. Let's get back to the real world. So I grew up in Piscataway, New Jersey, and lovely, suburban middle-class town, went to public schools. And, I was super studious. So when you say, what did you want to be when you grow up? Some of that was temporal. So I remember taking ballet lessons and I wanted to be a ballerina. And my dad would take me to the drag races at Englishtown, and I wanted to be a race car driver. So it really depended. But eventually, I really found my groove academically, and I just love school. There's something about it, and I still love school. And I became, really focused academically, and I was pretty good at math and science, and I started to think about that world, and medicine was really interesting to me. And I worked a few summers in a biochemistry lab. So that idea of becoming a physician kind of took over from middle school through college. And then some things changed, but those are the early years.
Well, there's so much to pick up on there, but you said, you saw ballet as maybe one opportunity, and then your dad, had you in kind of the racing car environment. And, there's an old saying, you are who you hang with. And so you see different environments, you found yourself there, but then it sounds like you found a passion for being a great student. And, the byproduct of that is you went to an amazing school. You got to go to Princeton. So tell us a little bit, you found your way into being a great student, and you found your way into Princeton. When you went into school, you talked a little bit about medical, but maybe some things changed. What did you go into Princeton for? What was your direction? And what was your path? And then maybe tell us a bit, did that path adjust, and maybe what some of the reasons why it did adjust?
Sure. Yeah, Princeton is gorgeous. I mean, it's a gorgeous school. It's a beautiful community and environment. And to be frank, I only knew it as an outsider because I was, living in New Jersey.
Right.
The idea of Princeton had a few pieces to it. My best friend's sister, so Everett and his sister, Lauren, knew about the school. Lauren was there. So there was a little bit of Lauren goes to Princeton. She's very happy there. the other piece, to be frank, was I was super studious. Like, like the kid you don't want because I was really boring. And I really, I had a hard time in school. It was pretty isolating because I was, socializing and all that just wasn't my vibe. So I wanted to be around more people like me. And I thought that Princeton might be like that, interestingly enough. And again, as an outsider, you just don't know. So my perspective was, this could be a place with people that are really into school, that love to learn, that are generally more like me. I had an experience with my guidance counselor. I went to talk about the whole school plan, because at a certain point, all of us do that, right? Or most
Right.
of us do.
Yes.
And the guidance counselor, very direct and very disheartening, because she said, Ivy League schools, I don't really know why you think that's for you. You're not going to get in. And I would apply to some safety schools. So I didn't really understand that language. It just wasn't language that I grew up with.
Right.
So I was like, okay. So, I went home and I talked to my parents and they said, look, apply to wherever you want to go. I was worried about money too.
Right.
But, yeah. But they said, just apply, just get in and we'll deal with everything. So I applied to every Ivy League school that my mom let me apply to. She wouldn't let me apply to Columbia in the middle of Manhattan.
Right.
And I picked a couple of safety schools too. So that was like, I think it was Georgetown.
Yes. Yep.
And maybe another one. But luckily enough, I got in. So once that happened, the question that you asked is the question, like, what do you expect? And so I expected it to be hard, but I expected it to be interesting and full of people who love learning.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know what? What happened was I learned how to love learning and I learned how to think. That's what the professors did. It's a very interesting environment.
Yep. So they challenge you that way, it sounds like.
Absolutely. They taught me, all this money and you spend all this time. What do you learn? Because it is a liberal arts school and there's a lot of conversation about that these days.
Yes.
I learned how to think and I learned that the world has more than one way to think.
Yes.
And more than one way to solve problems. And I absolutely loved it. Now, going forward, everyone's, what did you end up doing? So obviously, I did not become a physician.
Right.
That first 2 years, I was pre-med. Then the third year, you have to declare. And it wasn't my personality.
Yep.
So I was able to combine my interest in science with politics. So I studied how politics and science interact, which I think COVID-19 pulled the covers back on that one, baby.
Right.
So, that was cool. But we were so lucky. Companies came to campus early in senior year. I interviewed with a ton of companies, everything, insurance, consulting, retail, you name it. And I landed a role. I didn't know much about this world, but I was told that it was the best executive training program you could get into. And it was with Bloomingdale's. So I thought, okay, I got in. That's what I'm going to do. So I knew pretty early on that in the summer of that, year, I'd be starting at the corporate offices in Manhattan.
I'm just going to backtrack a little bit about what you shared with us so far. So I asked you, when you were a little girl and you were growing up, what did you want to be? Your first answer was ballerina. Your second answer was race car driver. Your third answer was in the medical field. And your last answer is I started at Bloomingdale's. So you crossed the gamut pretty well of different opportunities you could be. But I think the nugget there, June, for our audience is that so many times, so many of the guests on the Growth Fire podcast have a vision or dream of what they think they want to be. But in their journey, they're open. They let their mind be open to other ideas. And ultimately, they learn from those other ideas that there may be something that's more fulfilling than what they were considering at the moment. But as I hear you share your story, at the end of what you chose to do, you still pursued what you told me you loved so far, and that was you love to be a student. And Bloomingdale's had the best management training program of anybody else that came on campus. And so you stayed true to what your core was. You were influenced by other opportunity, but it seems as like you still wanted to be a voracious learner and look for a program that was going to give you that opportunity. So tell us, you end up getting the opportunity at Bloomingdale's, and tell us about your experience there.
Well, first of all, that comment is really insightful on your part. So thank you, because sometimes I have to think about stringing together the commonality,
Yes.
Throughout my career. And so that's really thoughtful. So getting into Bloomingdale's and, I went to Godiva and Disney and, some other pretty cool places was challenging. For sure. I mean, I'm very young. I had a P&L and a ton of people to manage, from high school students who worked part-time to elderly women in their 80s who were part-time.
Right.
So what I really had to learn, and I think I'll bucket up these companies because they're big companies. The challenge was to understand what value I could bring in the context of what the company felt mattered.
Yeah.
Right. So back to, I was learning how to think and I was learning how to solve problems. Every company values different things. And Bloomingdale's, the program there was very straightforward. It was academic and it was also operational, and it was cross-trained. So I was doing merchandising on the one, for a few months. I did ops in a few months. You did different things. Great, phenomenal background. I would highly recommend that kind of training for anyone who wants to be an operator in the future. In other contexts, I had to get what those companies were about and be adaptable. And so I think these two words come to mind. So are you able to adapt to an environment and adopt?
Yes. Yep.
They're different words, but they mean very important things.
Yes.
So do you adopt what you have to learn and be successful, and then adapt so that you can move forward and tackle the challenges and drive? For me as an operator, it's all about driving a P&L. That's what I've done, right? Yeah. And the people piece becomes the fun piece of that. So, even at a young age, I had to really get that, okay, that's what's needed here. And I didn't always do it well. Believe me, there's some stumbles along the way for sure.
Yep. You just said something a moment ago. And all these complex things, and some went well, some didn't well. But, you said, well, each company has its own personality and its own goals and objectives and stuff like this. At the end of the day, you said, I was driven by the P&L. And then you also mentioned, I was, at Bloomingdale's, I was managing part-time people in high school, and I was managing 80-year-olds. And so I can see the complexities of all of that. One message doesn't, unite and get absorbed correctly into all those different audiences. As you were trying to figure out how to corral all these different team members from different backgrounds and generations and things of that nature, to have them change their activities to adapt to what you were trying to do and measure P&L, anything that you could share with the audience and how maybe you strategically looked at things, or maybe how you measured that, maybe shared a little bit about, how you analyzed where you were at, where you wanted to go, the people you had, and how to get the P&L where you were wanting to get it to.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of us have a way of thinking about business, and that's a bit of who we are and who we have connected with and learned from. So yes, I definitely have a process, if you want to call it that, for how I look at things. And it's pretty studious, right? So back to what we talked about, I like to research, I like to understand the history, and I like to get into the future of where do we want to end up and back into what things do we have to do to get there? That's my thinking.
Yep.
The piece that perhaps is more important is, what are the companies like that I'm involved with? More often than not, we're going to a place that already exists. I have worked in a startup environment, but more often than not, that's not the case. So in those environments, I've had to then step back and think about, what is the structure like and why? So these companies are operating in a certain way, and why? And I mean, this is a very big word and it's overused, but I have to use it. Companies have personalities. They have a culture.
Yes. Yep.
And like it or not, that culture rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
It rules. And so the sooner I could figure that out, the more impactful I could be. Sometimes, like I said, I was good at that, and other times I lagged a little bit, and my performance lagged, as a result. So this piece of really understanding that the company has this personality, and you've got to go back to being this adaptable person is critical. So, for instance, at Bloomingdale's, very straight P&L oriented company, merchandise driven.
Yes.
At the time, they were at the top of the Lux game.
Yep.
So, it was an easy place because things were great. The Sesame Workshop, not for profit, mission. So the ideas there about how the company worked and the culture were so unique, in that the mission was driving their vision, and it was about delivering an educational promise and an ability to support children.
Right.
And the money piece, the revenue and the profitability piece, was critical to support the mission, but not drive it.
Right. Not drive it. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, just two great examples of two different organizations, and like culturally and vision wise, while they ultimately want to be successful, completely different ways of viewing all of that. And I think, Jim, one of the things you talked about too is organizations have a personality. We call it culture, an overused word, but a critical word. But sometimes managing a company from a spreadsheet would be so easy if a culture wasn't what controls the organization. And often as leaders, we don't move pieces around because culture may be harmed in what maybe spreadsheets say would be the right action. How do you balance between the two?
When you figure it out, let me know.
That's a golden nugget I want to walk away with today.
Yeah. So when I figure it out, I'll tell the world. Yes. I can tell you what I've done. And there are things that work and things that don't work. So, and again, another great question. So, the culture and balancing and just driving the spreadsheet are tough. So, a great example is at Godiva. It had an aura and a positioning that was well known to be very luxe and unique, and quite a bit apart from the rest of the marketplace. However, the market was moving in a direction toward more mainstream accessibility, and we were losing out.
Yes.
And it was showing up in the balance sheet. It was showing up in brand equity studies. It was showing up everywhere.
Yes.
And we had a company full of people who held tenaciously onto this idea of this luxe, super uber premium world. And to be frank, that going forward was probably not going to be sustainable.
Right.
So I was tapped to lead a project to bring the brand into an accessible market.
Yes.
Now, talk about black sheep, and pardon the pun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You weren't well liked on campus, I'm sure.
But, the CEO did what he did on purpose. He explained why he tapped me to do this. I literally built a company that was the Skunk Works, if you know that term, Skunk Works company.
Yes.
And to be honest, it was so challenging because while I was overly focused on the P&L, I missed some pieces about bringing the people along.
Yes. Yep.
So what was my obviously what happened? Well, I launched a business that literally today, is driving Godiva. It's out in the market. It's uber successful. What I didn't do, and I knew that I should have, but it was hard to do it. I needed to bring people with me step by step by step by step. It's like nobody wants to be told about the trip. They want to go on the trip with you. So that's just an example of where culture and driving an entirely new business structure needed to be fully integrated, right? And it can happen. I've done that in other circumstances where it was very smooth, and it was a delight because the culture was aligned with where we needed to go to build. But you've got to make sure that happens. And if you're the head of the company, that's your job.
I think you can write your book. Because what I just heard you say, June, is that you were summarizing all of that. And thank you for sharing. That was very deep. And thank you for sharing. What I heard there is after doing this research and trying to figure out what needed to be done, you took more of a solo approach than a larger team approach. People got to learn about the trip, but they really wanted to go on the trip. And maybe somewhere in there's the title of your book. But I think the learning lesson there is people want. There was a saying I used to repeat back a while back, and the thing is similar to what you just shared. If you want people to be part of the plan, make them part of the planning process. And so I think what you shared is you have to have people they don't want to be told what the plan is. They want to understand how the plan became a plan and what that was. They want to not hear about the trip. They want to go on the trip. So I think walking away, how do you bring culture and number and profitability together is about people being part of the planning. It's about experiencing the trip, not hearing about the plan or hearing about the trip. I think that's a big walkaway that people can take away from today.
It certainly has been for me, and it influenced how I went forward. And I certainly was considered successful at Godiva.
Yes.
But I think, anyone who values reflection will look at themselves and really peel some of these things apart and figure out, gee, I can, this is great, but I can still learn, from these bits and bobs.
Yes. No, excellent content. One last piece on that. I think, obviously the blending of culture and performance is something that everybody wants to be able to master. And, we joked about when we solve it, we'll write about it. But a few years ago, you used to work for Disney. I went to a 2-day workshop at Disney, and it was about culture. And the question should be, culture be intentional or is it reactionary or incidental? And I remember the opening remarks when something along like this, Disney has a very intentional culture. Nobody ever becomes a human being and wants to pick up cigarette butts with a smile and be on stage. And so I think it was, educational, and just that message being is it's okay to create an intentional culture. It's just finding the people with like-minded purpose to want to be a part of all of that. And Disney did a great job of being a very intentional culture and creating an amazing guest experience, and building a great company and finding super like-minded people that fit that, not trying to mold people to be part of that. And I think, as you're sharing about, being part of the trip, I think that's some of the learning lessons there is somewhat more having an intentional culture, not a reactionary culture as well.
Disney is a very, okay, fine, it's a special place, blah, 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 cute, However, when you're an executive there, that becomes very clear very quickly. The terminology, and I don't know if people still use this, is casting.
Yes.
And no matter how senior you are considered a cast member.
Yes.
And the hierarchy wants to make certain that you are cast in the appropriate role.
Yes. Yep.
And so this idea isn't, it's about as intentional as I've ever experienced.
Yes. Yes.
And the manifestation is the success that Disney has had over the years.
Yes.
To be frank, I was there 6 years. It's a long time for a lot of executives. And during that time, we were very fortunate to have ridiculous resources, almost endless resources. However, the challenge with those resources was, how do you bring the magic?
Yeah.
Literally.
Yep.
And I mean, a meeting had to be magical.
Right.
Everything had to be part of what Walt would have done. Walt meaning Walt Disney.
Right. Of course.
And there are people who walked that and people who didn't, and those who didn't last.
And I think, like you said, that's a very intentional culture, and they have done an excessive amount of investing and maintaining that, and it's worked for them. Not every brand can maybe we don't have casting and magical as part of what Disney can get away with that a little bit. It's a very unique company, but probably most businesses can find something that's unique to them, and it doesn't have to be casting and be magical, but just trying to find what could be relative to that. And I think my next follow-up question to that, June, is just in your growing of these businesses and helping these companies solve their problems, and ultimately bringing culture and economics together. When you were hiring people or promoting people, what was it that you were looking for over and above others that made you feel comfortable you have the right cultural performance fit as you were hiring new leaders and or promoting others?
So I'm a people chick. I'm totally lit up by people and being around them. So while the people part of an operating role is the hardest part of that role, I think it's also the most important.
Yes.
So for me, I had two very specific things that I look at. Thing number one is, what are the needs of the business? Hands down, very straightforward. And you have to get your arms around that. And if you don't know what the needs of the business are, find out. It's okay to do a little bit of work on that. The second piece is, what are the needs of the person that we're talking about being in the role? If you're interviewing, that's obviously an easy thing to do. If you're dealing with existing employees, a little more challenging, but still something that I really like to take on. So I wanted it to be a two-sided puzzle.
Yes.
And each side, I think, has the right value to be considered equal. I think that's a missing piece in a lot of companies.
Yes.
A lot of companies overly value, like the auto workers are on strike right now.
Right.
And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And Hollywood is on strike. And so where does this value equation land? For me, my approach, regardless of hiring or not, has always been, here's what we're trying to accomplish in the role. What do you want to accomplish? How can this support your professional goals? And how can I, as your whatever, manager, supervisor, boss, whatever, contribute to accelerating those professional goals? Those two pieces are magic for me and have been super, super productive. Underneath that is a structure. I am also, you probably figured this out, I'm a pretty structured thinker. And I know for a fact that people want to have freedom to go perform. So often structure gives you freedom.
Yes. Yeah.
So what I like to use is three things: management by objectives, MBOs. We all know that word.
Yes.
Then I like to use objectives with key result points. And all of that is developed using the SMART acronym that we all know.
Yep.
So once that's done, you've got this beautiful playing field for people. I'm a sports enthusiast. I'm a huge sports person. Sports work because most of the times you know the rules.
Right.
And then you just go play.
Yep.
So if you create that structure for people combined with a really good understanding of who they are as a person, what they want out of it, and the needs of the business, I think you have a very potent combination to deliver excellent performance.
Yeah.
And, great structure to address the issues that will come up when performance is not meeting the
Yes.
expectations.
Yes. Yeah. And, using your sports analogy as you're sharing that story, Jen, I was just thinking about, you're having these MBOs and using the SMART concepts and all this, but I really thought about, on a playing field, we want to score a touchdown, we want to score a basket, whatever it might be. We have a goal, but we also have boundaries. We have out of bounds, and we have penalties and fouls, and we have a time limit to do so. And using you're trying to help these people accomplish their goals while they're helping a company to accomplish its goals. You create these MBOs and use SMART philosophies and all this, but there's specific, measurable, attainable, timely results that can come out of these types of things. But it's giving them what's out of bounds, what's a penalty, what's a foul, what is a touchdown, and we only have so many minutes to get this done, or we run out of time to be able to get it done. And I think, from your style of how you were trying to groom some people there, I could easily see getting the right people in those seats with that kind of leadership and structure, as you called it, which is a flexible structure as long as it's playing the game that's on the field at the time with the goal to win and the timeline it has to be, how it can be very highly successful.
Yes. And I think the piece that I would like to add to that is the human piece.
Yes.
So for me, I said this. I really am a people. What's the word? They light me up. They drive me. So
yes,
being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Just be straight with people. Make it easy for people to win.
Yes.
Make it easy for them to win. Don't burden them, and lead with your humanity, whatever that looks like. We're all different. I have a few different sides, and I've had some really smart people help me, and I've paid to take a lot of training to be able to bring that humanity when it's appropriate to motivate people. That we always worry about, how do I motivate people? How do I motivate people? And I don't always understand that, to be frank. I get the incentives,
yes,
which are different.
Yes.
Money is an incentive and vacation. Yes. Those are incentives. But motivation is from within. And the way that I live is motivation comes from being with that person.
Yes.
Be with them. Who are they? What are they about? How can I give them? And what can they give me? That's where all of the juicy bits, the good stuff, is.
Well, and perfect segue into, I've got two more questions for you, but the next question is very people related and growth related, but have you had any mentors in life, people, and how did they help you grow in your journey?
So mentors are a beautiful thing. and I like that term because it elevates our positioning around that human being. And some people deserve to be elevated. So I'm very fortunate that I've come in contact with a lot of people who have helped me and some of them are still around, and I've had a chance to tell them that they're very special people. So yes, I've met some really cool people. The thing that's become clear is with my personality of, being this puzzle master. Yes. and connecting things through complex research and understanding and then delivering outcomes. I've done that with the people throughout my background. And these wonderful nuggets that I've learned or lessons, they're not always clear at the time, but they come later on. And it's nice to let people know, and to say, hey, Kevin, you're somebody important. We're going to stay in touch.
Right.
One example, and I'll say this quickly and we'll move on. There's this one gentleman that I just think is so special. His name is Ken, and I was very young. in retail at May Merchandising, along with a few other women. And to this day, we stay in touch. And it's so funny because he is a captain of retail. He runs multi-billion-dollar retailers, right?
Yes.
And he wanted to retire, and he was on a board, and he was, chairman of the board. And they needed him, and they pulled him back. He's like, they pulled me back in to be the CEO. He did that. He turned the company over, and it's now public. But we sent him this email to say, hi, how are you? He just meant so much to us. And you know why that was, Kevin? Because of how he treated us.
Yes, I can tell. I can just tell by telling the story. Yeah, I was going back to the relationship side, the caring, the humanity side, I think is how you said it earlier. But I could just tell, that's what resonated with you, not only the wisdom and the experience, but just the relation.
Absolutely. And he, to this day, he's funny. He says, oh, I failed at retirement.
I love it.
I said, okay, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, it's funny though, just reflecting what you said, June, about mentors and other guests on the Growth Fire podcast. I mean, so many past guests talk about it, but I think sometimes one of the biggest things that mentors deliver that they don't understand that they are is just their charisma. They have an aura or a charisma about them that we learn from, and we aspire to maybe make some adjustments in how we present ourselves, how we share stories, whatever it might be. But I can hear almost in Ken's charisma maybe was part of what that was as well.
Yes, Ken, he is charismatic because there's no was about him. He was just this past summer putting this company up for an IPO, and I attended this very special meeting that it's a retail club that I'm in, and he presented his deck around the IPO and all these different things. And the way he presented it, it was just, he is an older gentleman now, right? A very, very, what's the word? He just has a weight about him. He has a presence about him.
Yes.
And he's a former Naval Academy guy. I mean, he is, West Point,
right.
Harvard MBA.
Wow.
He's a heavy dude,
right.
heavy dude. But he just has this way of relating and making you feel like, wow, I get it, or I want to get it, or I understand how you powered this multi-billion-dollar company from they were losing money. It's called Academy Sports. They were not doing well. He came in 2 years, turned around and launched an IPO. And the way he talked about it, he laid out, 4 major principles. I may be getting that wrong, but I believe it was 4. And it was all about that relatability, obviously intellectual capacity. And so again, for me, when I think about how do you work with people and relate what you know and where you want them to go, it's not complicated. And don't make it complicated. Stick to the simple basics and figure out how to relate. Figure out what that piece of communication is that can make a difference.
That's so well spoken, June. And thank you so much for sharing everything you shared today. A lot of our conversation today talked about leadership, humanity, MBO smarts. And I just had a recent podcast guest named Scott Edinger, and he just wrote a book about how to be effective in leadership. And so much of what you just shared is coming out in Scott's new book. And I think it's just great to interview other people on the podcast and hear about different experiences of how you've helped yourselves grow. But more importantly, you said what really fulfilled you is understanding what made the person that you were working with want to grow and how that could line up to the business. And so I so appreciate you sharing your story and your examples of how you've grown in your career. June, I'm sure there's some people that want to reach out to you after they have had opportunity to listen or watch the podcast. What's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Oh, yeah, please do. It's super simple. It's June@junearcher.com.
That's super simple. June@junearcher.com. June, thank you again for being a special guest today. We wish you great success on your ongoing journey, and thank you for your time today.
Kevin, thank you for having me. This has been a blast. So good luck with your podcast, and I appreciate the time.
Thanks, June. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.